Let me start off by first explaining where we are. We are in the back bedroom of my home, and I'm back here, frankly, because my son is hosting a sleepover, so they have taken over the room that we normally use for this. If you've been watching for the last few weeks, you know we've been talking about finding your sweet spot, looking at your talents and gifts, and coming up with a way to make a career out of that, or pursuing your passions. So far, we've looked at somebody who's doing it part-time, someone who's doing it full-time, and in a little bit, we're going to look at somebody who's doing it and not getting 1 cent out of it, but loves what she's doing. But first, I want to issue a warning. If you are going to pursue the gifts that God has given you, you've got to be very aware of the dangers of chasing the phenomenon. That's what I call it. I don't know if that's an actual phrase or if it's something that I just invented. But when you pursue something, oftentimes it will have a life of its own, and you will think, aha, I can do that again. Well, the truth is you didn't do it in the first place. It just happened in spite of you, not because of you. I learned this a few years ago when I heard that a friend of mine was having a baby, and so I wrote her a letter just wanting to congratulate her on her upcoming, this was going to be her first child, so I just wanted to congratulate her on her son that was about to be born. So I wrote her a letter, and about a year later, that letter, which suddenly had a life of its own, was published in a national book. And I thought right away, wow, if that letter was that good, I can outdo it. I can write a book, or I can write a letter that would be better than this letter. Because, you know, if God could use what I did here, who knows what he could use. And so every time after that I wrote an email or a letter or a note, I thought I had to be so profound, and so it never worked again. In fact, I no longer really write emails because I've been tainted by the whole experience. It was a great thing that happened to me, but I no longer can be genuine without thinking, I wonder how many people are going to see this. I wrote one letter intended for one person, and a lot of people saw it. But when I tried to write for multiple people, it didn't go anywhere. I was caught chasing the phenomenon. Our story this week, again, it's somebody who's doing it on a volunteer basis, but our story this week is about somebody who had a similar experience, but she dealt with it so much better than I did.
All the little guys.
This is a story about a girl and her dogs. That's dogs with an S, plural. It is very hard to take a picture of an animal. The moment you think you've got them, well, they move out of frame. And so we decided to focus our camera on the photographer, Sherry Ekman, and to let her worry about the pups. Sherry is what you call a dog person. She's always liked them, but it actually wasn't until about 4 years ago that she owned one on her own as an adult.
She fit into the palm of my hand. She was so small.
She rescued Emmy in 2010, and since then...
I can bring Evie over here if you want. Evie, come here. Come here, Bubba.
Since then, she has averaged a dog a year, but she knows her home has limitations, and so we go back to the animal shelter. A couple of times a week, Sherry comes out here to take pictures and post them on the Facebook page. She's been doing this now for about...
It's been 2 years now.
Yeah.
You know, I'd have to look and see how many dogs we've adopted out and how many cats we've adopted out, because you don't keep track. Like, it gives me, it's so fun to be able to go on the Facebook page and look at the dogs from 2 years ago, and then I'm like, I remember that dog.
And along the way, she has become equally as passionate about photography. She started to take pictures of nature, of scenery, of sunsets, but always she comes back to the dogs. Consider this, one photo shoot of one animal can take up to 50, 60, maybe 70 pictures until Sherry finally finds the perfect one.
And he was just such a good dog. He was such a patient subject, and he just sat there and let me practice and practice and practice. And then I was just so pleased with the shot because the background blurs out. It really draws the dog into focus, and his eyes are looking directly at you.
Now this is where our story takes a turn, because it's not about a dog at all, or even about taking your time in search of the perfect photo. Instead, it's about one moment, really just a few seconds, when Sherry came up to one of these kennels and saw a cat.
Was completely a fluke. That cat had one expression. And I think I was in a hurry that day, and I flipped open the kennel door and I looked at the cat and I thought, oh my gosh, this cat looks so mean. I'm not taking it out of this kennel. And so I stood there and I said, click, 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 and I took maybe 5 pictures.
This is the image that she captured. She posted it on the shelter's Facebook page, and then somebody else took it and turned it into a graphic. And that graphic went viral. Sherry started to get notes and letters from the UK, from Norway. It was even published in a newspaper in Nigeria. It took only a few seconds, and it was nowhere near her best work, but people all over the world have seen what Sherry captured. In fact, the cat was adopted and now has its own blog and growing fan base. And although when something similar happened to me, it tainted me, somehow Sherry manages to deal with the phenomenon by putting it in the proper perspective.
Anything that I do as far as these pictures with these animals isn't really about me. Does that make sense? Like, I do this and maybe one day it will turn into an animal and photography career for me. But at the moment, my entire motive is really finding shelter animals' homes. Could you be any cuter? Okay.
To put it another way, you have to remember the cause, why it is you started to do what you're doing in the first place. In this case, you pledged to focus on just one dog at a time. Okay, maybe 2 dogs at a time.
It's not normally. I would take pictures.
I should point out that all the dogs you saw there running around in the yard, every one of them was adopted out maybe a day or 2 after we went to film that part of the story, so Sherry's work continues to be very successful. When she started all this, her hope, her goal was just to have one day where she showed up to the shelter with her camera and all the dogs were adopted. There was not one to shoot or photograph. That's happened. Actually, she's had 10 weeks of such days, so she has had a huge impact in the animal world of New Hanover County. What have I learned from this story about my own experience? Maybe it's this. I think when we're genuine, when we're sincere, like I was when I wrote the initial letter, God can take that and do wonderful things with it. But when we try to have an ulterior motive, or when we think we've unlocked a key and figured him out and now we're on our way, well, that's when all of our efforts go nowhere and we end up chasing something that is truly impossible to catch. Next week, we're going to tackle one of the biggest religious, well, not one of the biggest religious question of all time. Why do bad things happen to good people? That'll be next week. I'm Doug Wahl in Wilmington, North Carolina. God bless.